Did you know that Nintendo has added a total of 25 Game Boy Advance games on the American Nintendo Classics app, and all of them have been published by Nintendo? Well, that streak ends on September 25th when Namco adds both Mr. Driller 2 and Klonoa Empire of Dreams. Yeah, that's really cool news. But are either of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Edge, Nintendo, Power, and more classic magazines that reviewed these games back when they first came out. So prepare to get dirty because we're digging tunnels in this Namco-themed episode of Nintendo Classics Review Crew. Originally intended to be a puzzle-based continuation of the classic 80s series Dig Dug, Mr. Driller quickly became a fun mainstay for Namco, first debuting in the arcade, before eventually finding its way to everything from the WonderSwan Color to the PlayStation 5. First released in Japan in early 2001 as a Game Boy Advance launch title, it took Namco 4 long years to bring Mr. Driller 2 to American shores. Years after most of the system's biggest hits came out. As you'd expect, the sequel comes with a few new quirks, along with a trio of single-player modes and a 2-player matchup to see who can drill the furthest. Was that enough to win over the critics in 2005? Well, let's find out. Unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of magazines that reviewed Mr. Driller 2 on the Game Boy Advance. Perhaps that's because it came out years after the Japanese version, or maybe it was just a low priority with the new hardware and games coming out. Either way, the magazines that actually bothered to review it were either hot or cold on this puzzler with very little middle ground. Nintendo Power, for example, gave the game the lowest score, a dismal 5 out of 10. As addictive as Mr. Driller 2 is, the Game Boy Advance's solo screen doesn't provide enough vertical space to give you time to plan much of a falling block strategy. You're often fleeing in panic, fun for burrs, too chaotic for the long haul. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have NGC Magazine, which gave the Game Boy Advance sequel a 79% in their 92nd issue. Edge went one tick higher, leading to the highest score, an 8 out of 10. Now, it is worth mentioning that Edge actually ended up reviewing the Japanese import back in 2001, which may help to explain how he landed on this. The conversion is excellent, and although everything looks unfeasibly small at first, the game rapidly feels as though it has found its natural home on Nintendo's new console, rather than surrounded by the latest display of 3D technology usually found in the sonorous environments of your typical Japanese arcade. But far more importantly, it's still a brilliantly simple concept, and it's still brilliantly enjoyable. Look, the Mr. Driller series has always been fun, but the complaints from 2005 are sound. It was so hard to go back to the single-screen version of the puzzler when the Nintendo DS game came out. I'd argue that things have only gotten worse in the last 20 years, so your mileage may vary on this one. When Klonoa first debuted on the PlayStation, the critics raved about the clever level designs and the adorable characters. Unfortunately, consumers didn't bite, opting instead for 3D platformers like Crash Bandicoot and Gex. Fast forward a few years and Klonoa was back with an even more ambitious and over-the-top adventure on the PlayStation 2. And once again, American gamers were largely indifferent. Hoping for some better luck, Namco decided to release their next installment, this time on a Nintendo Portable, on... It was on September 11, 2001. Yeah, this series is doomed. If you're one of the many people who missed out on this platforming classic 24 years ago, then this is a great time to catch up. I'm gonna let the critics explain why. Let's go ahead and kick things off with Electronic Gaming Monthly, which gave this version of Klonoa one of the lower scores, a 7.8 out of 10. But wait, before you grab your pitchfork, this is really a story of two critics that loved the game, and then one that really pulled down the overall average. The naysayer was Shu, who gave the game a 6.5 out of 10. I'm all for traditional 2D platformers, especially when they play and control as well as Klonoa does. The gameplay is nothing revolutionary, mind you, and this title is nothing next to Mario Advance. But the clever puzzle elements, clean graphics, and simple premise all make this one of the better GBA carts on the market. Empire of Dreams is a breeze to beat, especially since free lives are always available. You know, like how you male readers wish Jeannie Kim could be. Yeah, I'm just gonna skip past that in order to highlight Milkman, who gave the game a 9. Since most folks never got to experience Moonlight Museum, Klonoa's first handheld adventure, it's a real treat to get a brand new Klonoa game on the Game Boy Advance. The control is right on the money, and the music and sound effects are vintage Klonoa. Consistent with the series, the level design is the real star here, offering 5 worlds of uninhibited fun, with a variety of action and puzzle-based stages that'll appeal to a broad audience. An instant classic, in my opinion. Now, it is worth mentioning that there was one magazine that went a little bit lower, and that was Game Informer, which gave Empire of Dreams a 7.5 out of 10. Climbing back up the scale, we see Nintendo Power go with a 4 out of 5, while Computer and Video Games agreed, giving it an 8 out of 10. Klonoa has so much charm that you'll kiss your Game Boy Advance for making your dream for an original and addictive platform game come true. Now, if you're a longtime fan of the Review Crew series, then you won't be surprised when I tell you that the top score comes from GamePro. Giving it a 4.5 out of 5, Four-Eyed Dragon concluded that the graphics and sound are sharp as those of any other Game Boy Advance game. Bright, kaleidoscopic levels fill every inch of the screen, while the music and the sound effects play nicely with Klonoa's game style. Klonoa Empire of Dreams is a straightforward platformer with enough gameplay variety that'll make you want to play to the very end. Now, with an overall average of 81%, this seems to be the general consensus. While certainly not as visually dazzling as the console versions, Empire of Dreams has inventive levels and fun gameplay. Of the 2 games hitting the Nintendo Classics app, this one is by far the one I'm the most excited for. Definitely give this one a try. Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist with literally every single Game Boy Classics edition. Check it out. Now, here's the question I have for you. What third-party Game Boy Advance games do you want to see come to the Nintendo Switch Online? Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're probably going to be back tomorrow with a review. But if not, I want you to know that I really wanted to. While you wait in suspense, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.